Hey, Talia here, and today on I Got Back Up, I'm joined by Harrison Ward. Also known as the Fell Foodie, Harrison is an outdoor cook, author, mental health speaker, and TV personality who at one point was drinking upward of 20 pints a day. Using alcohol as his vice to escape and sedate his mind from depression, obesity, and suicidal thoughts, Harrison was struggling in silence. In 2016, discovering hiking combined with his love of cooking, Harrison's course of life changed drastically. Harrison, when you hear the phrase "I got back up," what does it make you think and feel?
Um, well, from a personal perspective, I guess it's kind of maybe trying to restart, maybe get back on top of things, maybe again, and I think maybe have a moment of redemption in a way. I guess I think that's how I sort of come to terms with it. For somebody else, I guess it may be a much smaller thing, but I suppose given maybe my backstory, it feels like for me it was quite a getting back up really from the rock bottom moment. I guess.
I like that you use the word redemption. I haven't heard that one being used a lot. So, and with all of that in mind, then, and obviously you just mentioned your story, I want to go into your story, and I want you to start wherever you feel most resonates with kind of the person you've become today and everything that's happened. But I want you to go back to wherever you want to begin.
Well, we'll probably go back to the start then. In that case, yeah, sort of short life history, I guess, one of those. But I guess it's a story I didn't really imagine I'd have sort of gone through. I guess it's not one of those that you start off thinking, this is the path, my path of intention. It was one that was kind of forced upon me, and one that I suppose looking back as well, there's moments where you perhaps want to change certain things, but I see them as all maybe building towards the person I am today, as you alluded to. So for me, I think it was kind of right back into sort of childhood. I mean, I was brought up just outside the Lake District, sort of in Carlisle, quite close to a lot of green space and sort of quite a rural upbringing too. These days, I'm quite well known for being in the outdoors, but back then, I suppose it was something that I didn't really fully embrace what was on my doorstep early on. But there's nothing really untoward at this point. There was no sort of moments that would inflict perhaps the trauma that was to come later on, or moments of trying to get over certain mental afflictions. Childhood was quite happy. Again, I sort of grew up with my mum and my sister. Again, quite sort of happy-go-lucky character there. Played a lot of sports growing up, and was quite really, I would say, a happy child. So again, there was nothing there which was going to have any cause of any inkling of what was to come. But found myself really through puberty, almost overnight, going through this quite internal change, I suppose, as well as sort of the major change you're going through, sort of hormonally, I guess, as we all go through. But really having this sense of complete, demotivation and insecurity and almost hatred for myself and constant belittling and activities maybe I previously enjoyed and would sort of really go in almost two-footed in was kind of now aspects that I was kind of feeling I was quite false. I was almost putting a mask on to go through these elements, but also not wanting to be a burden on anybody else. So I guess almost always or acting as if things were much better than they were, whilst internally having this battle with yourself. But it wasn't something that I could have preempted. It wasn't, I guess, you look back and try and pinpoint a psychological moment that's going to cause this moment of change. I think it really was just an overnight thing. Maybe the wire's not quite switching over, a difference from that moment on. But it's something that really I've battled with from that moment. So now, sort of 34, this probably first reading its head maybe around sort of 13, that sort of time, and really caused quite a sort of snowball effect. And again, that rock bottom moment later in life for me.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you were talking about how as a teenager you don't know when the switch happened. And I think something that not a lot of, I mean, we obviously do realize, but there's so many of us when we are a teenager, we have no idea what's going on realistically. And yeah, with puberty, with so many things about us changing and so many different aspects, whether that's starting new schools, being introduced to new friends, so many different things happen when we're so young. Obviously, as we get older, we learn how to change and how to deal with a lot of things, but so many things can literally happen overnight as a teenager, and it can change our inner world so much that it does then almost snowball and start to impact who we then become for the rest of our lives. And a lot of it can be a lot to do with mental health, but we have no idea at the time, and we're this kid still, realistically teenager kid, and we're just like, hey, wait a sec, like, why am I really upset, or why am I really angry, or why am I, what's this weird emotion that's obviously anxiety, but what's this weird new emotion that, like, I don't remember feeling. And it's so important now that obviously the younger we are, the more people are exposed to these kind of things, because like you were saying, is it can just suddenly happen, and it can just affect who we then become here on out.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this was really my first understandings of what I now know to be sort of my sort of clinical depression battle, really. But at the time, it was something that you were looking around, I suppose, for similarities. I suppose it was also around the infancy of the internet. We didn't quite have social media as it was at the time. There wasn't film stars, sportsmen, sports people speaking out about issues they've been suffering from. So you felt very alone in sort of what you're going through. And again, not knowing any different. Again, as a child as well, I suppose all of a sudden it becomes your cross to bear in a while. So for me, it was something that certainly didn't want to point to anybody else. Felt as if it was quite insignificant in terms of the world's problems, but internally, I was just really putting myself at the very bottom of everything in terms of my level of hierarchy. I really didn't want to really exist at this point. I was battling sort of suicidal ideations, constantly questioning things I'd gone before, whilst also still trying to go in to these environments as quite an extroverted character. But internally, sometimes, having that almost angel and devil on the shoulder sort of moment. So it was something that really was a noticeable change for me internally. But I think from the outside, certainly the friends and family, was something that wasn't too noticeable. But feeling very alone in that setup with not having anything to compare to. These days I think we are much better in terms of breaking down the stigma of mental health, pushing, reaching out to talk. Whilst there's still a lot of work to be done, I think there are a lot more tales and case studies out there, or people that we look up to, or even idolize in some retrospects, speaking out about their personal bits. I think it's become a lot more of a normalized conversation. Whereas again, growing up maybe rurally in sort of the sticks, a place that I quite like Cumbria for the fact it is quite behind the times at sometimes, but it was very much still those mantras, sort of boys don't cry, man up sort of elements. You wouldn't speak about these elements at all. And at 13, finding myself working in the hospitality trade quite a lot, just sort of to get a few pennies around my studies, alongside my education at the time. Again, that was also environment, being very much in the pub. It was very much quite agricultural based, like the farmers in there, blokes coming in, the tradesmen coming after work. These conversations weren't coming out about at all. You certainly weren't seeing blokes putting an arm around each other and sharing how their day had gone back then. So it all constantly added into that maybe internal sort of burying of what this affliction was at the time.
And that's what we do as human beings. We bury everything. We don't want to be burdens on people. We don't want to share all the time what's going on. And a lot of the time, to think when we do start to feel these things, maybe for the first time, or not even the first time, like it can continue, is we can feel that no one else in the world is going through it. And I think that's what's really interesting, is that we feel so alone, that we feel that no one really can relate, and no one else is going through what we're going through, because obviously what we are all individually going through in our minds is our own personal hell, because that's what we're going through. But what we don't realize is that a lot of people around us are also going through their own personal battles, their own, I've spoken to a lot of people that, have even said that every day, the day they morning, the moment they wake up, sorry, it begins, and how they get through every day. And that's why it's like, well, this is what we don't realize, is that just because you or I are going through something, so is pretty much so many other people. And but that doesn't help us at the time, because we feel so alone, and it's so difficult to get through whatever it is, whether it's that day, that moment, that hour, what we're going through.
Yeah, certainly that. I think sometimes, looking now, I found many people obviously that have gone through very similar. You almost find a bit of, a tribe to sharing paths there. And of course, later in life too, which I'll get to in a moment, again, finding circles that have gone through similar lived experiences and stuff and sharing those bits, which was very comforting, really. Because again, at the time, you do feel very low, but also I felt very guilty personally for the fact that I didn't put my issues up there amongst certain things that were going on in the world too. So again, that maybe buried things further, the fact that I didn't feel as if they were as significant, perhaps, as things that were going on, maybe even globally, a bit out there too, which again I think is quite an interesting point in terms of we're no longer just seeing what's going on down the street anymore. We see things happening sort of day in, day out, thousands of miles away all the time. So that plays on our psyche a bit too, I think, in terms of our relation maybe to other people globally. It's a much bigger fishbowl than it used to be in terms of seeing how someone down the road was doing, wasn't it? Or the tribe in the various wood side of things. But it was something that, again, so I felt as if personally I didn't have the right to maybe complain about what I was going through. There wasn't the structures in place at the time to be seeing tales of similarity. And again, I suppose it was that transitional point generationally, I suppose, of what was talking about what is now quite an open conversation about mental health, and the fact that it's completely fine to go through moments like that and speak out about. These aren't always long-term battles, of course. Some people can have much shorter spells, which might be caused obviously by situations or even employment side of things, or things that have gone on day to day. But for me, this was something that really was that start of that battle that has been kind of day to day sort of thing. whilst it certainly doesn't read itself as days as bad as that as they went on to be through my early adolescence. It's one of those that sometimes you learn to manage this better as you go along. I think in little bits, but just the retrospective aspect of it. But I think talking is such a healing practice for that. Something that again, suffering in silence for a good 12 years, not sharing that out to my closest friends or anything, was something that really, looking back now, would have been the exact opposite of what I had told my younger self back then.
I think a lot of people would say that, and a lot of people do. They tell people to reach out and to speak out, and it's things that we might not have done back when we needed to do that ourselves. And the point about what you just mentioned, the point about living with mental health and whether it's short term, long term, whatever it might be, that's something I do want to obviously talk about. But I think what I want to do now is kind of know a little bit more. Then after kind of the teenage years, where did things kind of go for you from there?
Yeah, so throughout this period again, so I mentioned I was working quite a bit alongside my studies at the time, just going through the education system again, still carrying on very much with aspects day to day, good friendships, good sort of sporting aspects in there, but internally having this sort of suffering. And throughout that sort of trade in the hospitality trade, I guess I worked through various means in that from initially washing some pots up in the back of a kitchen, sort of a few pennies at 13, 14, to waiting some tables at 15, 16. Then at 18, being able to work behind the bar, sort of very much in that rite of passage, that British culture, now in the pub scene, which brought a very different aspect in all aspects really to me, into my life, into the people I was maybe hanging around with, those people I was interacting with. Also, maybe that sort of culture into the pub trade at 18, very much that celebration of getting to that point. Plus, then being in that side, which is very much the British mantra of being out there, I guess, getting the bougie on the weekends, having a pint after work, elements in there. So that was something that quite quickly I began to enjoy. I enjoyed the aspects of different lives I came across, but I also enjoyed the fact that this social setting for me. I mean, whilst I was quite a social individual, again, good friendships and stuff there, I enjoyed this aspect of not being alone in my own sort of thoughts. So whilst when at home, I could be someone that would maybe go quite insular, go quite introverted, and be someone that would just was sat in your own four walls, as your mind sort of keep playing on various bits, quite destructive internally. This almost allowed that little escapism from there under the guise of being social. It was something that I used quite throughout the later years into adolescence, but also now using this tool sort of in terms of the alcohol side at the time, which was giving me a brief respite, I suppose, at the moment. So not only was that a forceful push into that rite of passage, that the coming of age, going drinking down the pub with your mates, or having the beer with your dad at 18, and subsequently heading out there more and more. It was also providing a bit of a solace for me mentally in silencing those thoughts, I guess, through inebriation, through being drunk at the time. So this became something that I wanted more and more of, because initially that was allowing that escape from my own mind. And of course, this meant my tolerance was building further from 18, having a couple of beers and stumbling home, as you would do when you've not really had much levels of consumption before. I certainly wasn't someone that was down the park of a bottle of cider in my younger years. It was quite a different introduction for me. But this became something I wanted more and more of. So quite regularly would go out. I suppose that was just a constant cycle of stumbling home drunk, going back to work on the shift, still my education side too, but taking on more and more shifts at the pub, which allowed in itself to me in that environment for longer periods of time. And by the time I went to university at sort of 19, away to York, I was now regularly sort of going out, most nights of the week. I was drinking quite heavy units at the time. Was someone that was sort of quite known for being in that point. So it was quite a broad chap too, maybe that rugby sort of mantra, being in the sinking a few beers, quite hollow legs, quite blokey, being out there with a few beers. So moving away to a different city, now from quite a rural upbringing, York to me was quite an eye opener. Having almost this bit of a kid in a sweet shop, having access to a lot more of these spaces now that were in walking distance, where previously I was kind of a bus away from the nearest city, didn't drive at the time. Now these places are open till the early hours at all moments. And also the fact that you could almost go into that cloud of secrecy in an element. You were now in an element where nobody knew who you were anymore. You weren't back in that family homestead of where, your people from school were around, or your mum's friends, or people you worked with, people you worked with, a different environment now with this different almost activity path. So straight away, university, instantly fueled again by alcohol. It was all freshers week, meeting new people, all social lubricant to get to know various individuals, something I was well versed in at the time, but it was still masking these things that were going on behind the scenes. So I found myself quite quickly getting a job back in the hospitality trade, back behind the bar, an aspect I found quite familiar. And then things really began to snowball further for me. So whilst I was on this path educationally to further my studies at the point, this was now becoming something that was my sole focus, really was the thing I'd put up with anything else, because really it was my own mental health and well, even physical health at the time, my tool to help with that. So it was quite medicinal in the early days, but this was now becoming more of a poison for me at this point. And at my worst here, so around sort of 20s, I'd been in Europe for about a year. I dropped out of my studies. My studies fell by the wayside, really pushing forward with this almost drinking career in a way. It was kind of just day to day, getting my fix, getting that quota of what I dubbed the elixir at this time, and found myself back in that trade because, of course, that was financially sustaining me as well to be able to afford this sort of lifestyle, to be able to afford that path. And in my 20s now, I ballooned in weight. I'd put about sort of 6 stone at the time. I think I was about 22 stone at my heaviest. Again, I was drinking most days, well, every day, sorry, in excess of 20 pints a day. At the time, I'd taken up smoking full time too. So I was living a very different life, very destructive path that really was all internally trying to help me survive on this sort of this mortal coil. So it was a very odd path, and one that I didn't really fully comprehend at the time what I was going through. It was more survival mechanism. So I was burying those thoughts internally, not speaking out and sharing to friends and family, but trying to utilize this tool to really keep me present and almost keep me sedated in day-to-day life, to be present for other people. But looking back, I mean, obviously quite highly functioning at this point, and already the path that was to become into my alcoholism.
But that's the thing with alcohol. People drink it for many different reasons, of course, but you take a drink and everyone says, oh, your inhibitions go, or your worries go, you feel great, and people use it for different reasons. But yes, I mean, that's exactly it. You can see why people would continue to, because it makes you feel many different things that you don't when you're sober. And I'm not saying that's great, but it does. And if you are trying to escape from things, that's when you hear, how many times do you hear when something might not necessarily be going all right and someone goes, oh, just have a drink, it'll be fine, like that. Even that, it's like, if you're not having a great day, someone will go, oh, just have a drink, let loose, have a drink. But that's already, have a drink to forget about whatever it is that actually maybe you shouldn't really be forgetting about, or you need to be working on, or be talking out aloud about. So yeah, it's definitely something that, obviously is used for very, like I said, many different reasons, but can definitely go a very different way. And it's interesting as well when you're talking about the university thing, because whatever it is in life, whether it's uni, whether it's moving country, moving job, whatever it is, people can become a whole different person once they move to something else.
For me, later on, that was exactly almost what I had to do, was almost move myself from a different situation, both geographically and in terms of the route I was on. So that for me was actually quite a powerful tool moving across. But that allowing for a reset, I suppose, also can sometimes allow you to really be your true authentic self as well at certain points. So there's
Yeah.
both sides to that, I suppose, depending on the mental state at the time of where you are. I suppose for me, it found an element that was quite a safe spot for me to go about this activity, to try and keep myself, well, present and sane, really. But likewise, also in a different element, may have also not caused me to go on that path in the first place. But it's one that, I mean, which you alluded to there in terms of the coping mechanism for alcohol. I think in terms of certainly in UK culture, is one that we do drink on we drink to congratulate, we drink to commiserate all the time. It's always that tool that's there, and it's always in a place. But whilst it doesn't play a part in my life anymore personally, it's something that I'm certainly not anti towards. I think it's something that has a place for those who can sort of moderate, can enjoy drinks, enjoy the craft that goes into certain high end spirits and wines, but also knowing the fact that there is that risk level of this as a substance, as an addictive substance. And there's a great quote that I really love about sort of alcohol, and how it's a fantastic dissolvent. It's a dissolvent of finances, can be a dissolvent of relationships, but never problems. And for me at the time, that was exactly what I was trying to use this tool for, was to try and keep myself on this straight, even keel, try and keep myself present. But really, I was just trying to fast forward through life. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be present. I didn't want to live, but also felt as if I could not, no, not couldn't not live, sorry, for those sort of around me who were close and I loved as well. So it was kind of one of those battles where, though I'd had little care for myself, I was almost trying to fast forward to the end almost of my life quickly, to have as little impact on those around me. So that was kind of the tool for me at the time. I suppose it was the blackout drinking, constantly there, not being present, but whilst also having to try little impact as possible for those around me, whilst also highly functioning with this tool. So whilst it wasn't, now looking back, it wasn't a pathway I was aiming towards. I wasn't trying to get to that element each day. Quite quickly, I could see how I fell into that cycle of this sort of wash and repeat, waking up, opening the can straight away in the morning, starting again. And my tolerance was so high at this point, I guess, that each day you rather than even feeling like you were ground zero each point, you were starting underground almost, and you were trying to build back up to that point of feeling normal, which was then at this point maybe 6, 8, 10 pints in a day, just for me to feel as if I was back to being me, to then start to build on that sort of drunken medicinal path again. And that was just wash and repeat each day out. And really bizarre looking back, really. And it's such a different life that I lead now, but one that really at the time I was internally in um, for quite a number of years. I mean, there was a moment of potential change around my 21st birthday. That was really the first moment that I almost allowed anybody into what was kind of happening. So by this point already, going through sort of 7, 8 years of really internal suffering and silence. But my 21st birthday, a particularly big celebration, again, booze fueled, once again, everyone gathering, always using that as the tool that's all surrounded about this sort of drinking aspect. And one by one, these friends began to go home from York, where I was living at the time. And it really sort of dawned on me, how alone I really was in this lifestyle. Whilst I lived in a very social setting, I was always social. I was quite a lone ranger around the bars and pubs. I didn't really hang out with any groups because really that didn't suit my needs, I suppose. I bounced from group to group because they'd be out for shorter periods of time. They wouldn't be out on this elongated demise like I wanted at the time. But again, all being a very social setting behind the bar, very front of house, known in sort of quite locally in that sort of area. But really, the interactions I was having were mainly bartenders, mainly takeaway owners, I suppose, in this sort of lifestyle. So looking back, the signs were there. But one by one, these friends began to go home. And again, feeling so alone, feeling this cycle that really this was no longer helping me. This wasn't getting me out of my own sort of internal cerebral walls. It was actually keeping me in there more internally. And stumbling home in the early hours, 3, 4 in the morning. I didn't have a phone at this time. I didn't like to be contacted. I didn't really like to, again, be quite reclusive, I suppose, on certain aspects, shutting off, just going about this business. But I made a call home to our mum in the early hours. I think it took me repeated times to try and get through, waking her up, of course, in the early hours. And eventually she calls, she answers, sorry, quite sleep deprived in various bits. And my only intention was to say goodbye to her. I didn't feel as if I could go on any further. I felt as if this was no longer providing that escape from anymore, this tool. And that really was, I suppose, looking back, my first sort of cry for help a bit here. I don't think I really wanted to go through with the actions, but day in, day out, I was having these mental ideations of how to end my life all the time, constantly being there, of planning the time when I could eventually escape from it all. And I suppose it just slipped out a bit at the time through this call. And thankfully, obviously, it wasn't to be at the moment. I was taken back to Cumbria briefly at the time. I did seek some medical help at that moment. I have a great family doctor who ended up sort of, full circle really later down the line, was one of the people that sort of helped me in the recovery path again. But I wasn't willing to change myself at this point. I sort of slipped this statement out there drunkenly, not really fully believing that I wanted to make this change myself. So within that first week, whilst although there had been quite a few fractures in family and some close friends at that time from revealing this for the first time, I wasn't willing itself to come out that cycle. So I booked a ticket back to York, and continued this same life path, just constantly day in, day out, still functioning in that job for another 5 years, really, on this destructive path, whilst now almost being annoyed at the fact that from the outside, you were getting these aspects from my parents, from family, of constantly asking, how are you really? How are you feeling today? And feeling as if you were just now more problematic to them than you wanted to be in the first place. So again, it was that guilt sensation of really, I shouldn't have said anything. I've caused more problems now. The insignificance of what I was going through, and just trying to have as little impact and that burden as possible. So it's just a destructive cycle that continues further and further, really.
We're not ready to heal or to get through things or to accept things until we're ready. And I know that's almost like very blasé, but we as people, we might say we want help, we might say we whatever it is that we might need for help, but until we actually really accept it, we won't actually take it. So like someone could say they want help and sit in therapy, for instance, and they could have X many sessions and it not to change anything, because if they could be sitting in therapy, but if they haven't really internally accepted, okay, I'm ready to break the cycle, I'm ready to change, I'm ready to stop the habits, then you as a person will not do it. We've all been there. We will not do it until we're ready. And that's also like when you say to people, you can give someone amazing advice, And then you could walk away and you can think, well, why are they not doing that advice that I did them, which I know is going to help that person? Because it's the same thing. When the person isn't ready, they'll listen, but will they take it in? No, people will only do things when they are themselves ready to do whatever it might be. Anything. Like, even if it's like leaving a relationship, for instance, that they know isn't good for them, they won't leave it until they're ready internally, or unless they're forced to, until they're ready to leave things. And that's like you were saying as well with getting help or breaking the cycle. It's like there was obviously a part of you that did want it, but you weren't ready yet.
It is one of those sort of quite bittersweet, almost melancholic elements, isn't it? Really, that sometimes I've had people these days reach out to me about personal people in their life, whether it's partners, whether it's sons, daughters, and how they get them to change. And like you, I do think you have. It's very much an internal thing that has to get to that point yourself, but a point that not everyone reaches as well. I think it's important to note as well sometimes that you can't, again, the whole leading the horse to water sort of anecdote. It's one of those that I think for me it was very much having to reach rock bottom to try and get back up, to stay on brand.
Mhm.
One of those paths, but for others, I mean, perhaps again through those cycles, it might be more of an awakening as you're going through those paths. But on the majority, certainly from the substance side or even narcotic abuse, you do often see this having to reach that real point of not being able to go down any further is the point where they actually manage to sort of rebuild. But it's not littered with success stories, of course. There's many tales in there that do come from this. But for me, it was exactly that path. So 5 years later from that moment, I'm still in the same path. I've actually worked my way up the trade. So again, highly functioning through my vices at the time, finding myself in a relationship, which was something that I really wanted at the time. I was always looking for someone to share life with, sort of, memories and adventures and tales there. But I suppose still really didn't love myself in a way, so I couldn't really have that push onto somebody else. But also, I was already in a relationship with the alcohol, and the two really obviously didn't clash very well at all. Would always cause frictions, um, arguments along the way. The routine still I had to. I was very much in sort of quite hospitality hours, so it was quite unsociable hours where she was more 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. So I was weaving almost this alternative lifestyle that was, whilst there was elements that were seen, a lot of it was still very secretive to everyone I knew. Really, the amount I was consuming, I guess, and the amount of I suppose dedicated time I was putting towards um, this activity. But each time there was an argument, it just pushed me out further onto just drinking this away. Again, not facing those problems, just drinking them away, shutting off, not facing it, hiding from these issues. But it was very clear now, looking back, that of course that aim for me not to become a burden onto anybody else was now being the exact opposite. I was now being that burden onto this partner at the time, onto family, onto friends. They were seeing elements of the issues I was having. There was some moments of ultimatums from friends that there was the moments where it was going, look, if you keep behaving like this, we don't want to spend time with you anymore. And not really, that wasn't hitting home at the time. Whilst I wasn't an aggressive individual, I wasn't verbally or physically aggressive. I was just someone that was almost more sedate as went on. I just kind of just but was certainly unreliable. Someone that we wouldn't turn up to events or would be in the corner, quite heavily under the influence. So it was noticeable that why is he drinking, 4 times the amount everybody else is here? This isn't socially as normal for everybody else in the room. So those moments were there, and could have, I suppose, if this had carried on for me, I suppose those relationships might have been unhealable, really. So it's a moment that having that support network around me when the major change came was something that I certainly really do appreciate the privilege of. I think the fact that I still had that, because without those people, I'm not sure I'd have made the recovery I did. But around this time, it was sort of 2016 now, so I'm 25 from that initial maybe moment of allowing somebody in at 21 into what was going on mentally to a certain degree. 25, 6th of June 2016 was the moment really that I managed to break out of this cycle in somewhat. And I suppose it wasn't really a positive breakout initially. It was actually, I went out under the influence again after another argument with this partner, and I acted unfaithfully to this partner, which rightly so was the end of that relationship. I'd compromised that trust, I'd compromised that loyalty to this person. And for me, there, and I couldn't blame the alcohol for this because this was me. I had to take accountability for what I'd done, but it also felt as if it was quite a compromise of who I felt I was individually. I felt as if I wasn't this person. If I asked me to describe myself on traits, I would have said I was an honest person, I was a loyal person, but I was now acting in exactly the opposite methods. And this really, I think, hit home to me how compromised I now was by this substance that I was dubbing this elixir at this point. It was kind of ingrained, almost possessing my aspects of life, just putting it ahead of everything in play. But the minute I got up, literally brushing my teeth with the stuff each day, looking to get my quota to hit that point where I'd shut off from the world, to fall back into using my piss soaked mattress each night, to wake back up again, to get back up and do this shift. It was such a destructive lifestyle that really behind the surface was so hidden from those close to me. But this was the moment that really broke me out of that cycle. So losing that relationship at the time also quite quickly thrust me out of that other aspect of the fact that, look, I'm not who I believe I am here. I really came to terms with the fact that I was quite powerless towards this substance. I used the terminology at the time thinking I was an alcoholic, feeling that I had to get out of this path. And I remember going to work that next day, sort of the 7th of June, doing the breakfast shift for the punters who were staying in sort of the pub hotel at the time, and coming out after the breakfast shift, my boss seeing me and just going straight away, going, "You don't seem quite yourself today, Harrison." And I just broke down there and there in front of him. So at this point, really, it was for the first moment I'd had for maybe a good 7, 8 years, where I'd had at that point about 12 hours of sobriety. I'd threw my last pack of cigarettes in the bin. So I'm going through all this sense of withdrawal. Obviously, my relationship's just gone to dust behind me. And he said, "Go take a minute outside to yourself, just have a little sit out there." And I was outside, just again, staring at this wall, just completely, really quite absent of emotion from the outside, but internally just completely fractured. Just my whole foundations had just crumbled literally overnight. Who I believed I was, the lifestyle I'd built, the routine I was, and again, the activities I was into. I was known as a big drinker. I was known for being around town. That was me. That was my personality, and this was all disappearing. And really, again, I was meant to go back to my shift, but I didn't go back in at all till a friend of mine came back out to take on the shift in the afternoon. So I must have gone out there maybe 9:30 in the morning. Now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my colleague turns up to take over the shift. I'm still sat out there, and he comes straight out with a pint glass. He says, "Yeah, mate, get this down. This will sort you out." Again, that commiserations, congratulations sort of thing for booze. I just looked at him dead in the eye and just said, "I don't drink anymore, John." He said, "You are?" I said, "I don't drink anymore." And he looked at me just so bemused. So this guy I'd see at the end of the bar literally every night, pretty much every time I wasn't working, I was on that bar, drinking whatever was going, sort of human vacuum cleaner in a way, drip trays a lot, just taking that in to get that level of escapism. And overnight, I don't drink anymore, John. And really, it was a path from that moment that I knew I had to try and sort things out for myself. And I felt I could no longer be in this setting. So as you mentioned before about moving elsewhere, re-establishing things, resetting, this for me at the time, I had to leave that situation. So I could no longer stay in that trade and try and get sober. I felt as if that was too familiar an environment for me to be in. So I suppose I decided to go back to Cumbria where I was from. And for the first time in my life, come clean, I suppose, to those around me, friends and family, using the medium of my Facebook page at the time, to my personal Facebook page, to say why I'd left York and the reasons behind this. And I suppose in a way it was also, I deeply hurt this person I loved at the time. I felt as if I had to be accountable for what I'd done. I couldn't just slide that up and be like, this is all grand, this is about me now. It was through hurting somebody else and through hurting someone that I deeply loved, through losing that aspect of me I really wanted, through being compromised, that really broke me out of that structure. So it was one of those that wasn't, certainly an overnight awakening, or that's it, we're going to go and change and do this now, or having that moment myself. It was through really causing that pain to somebody else, that exact bit of not wanting to be that burden, that threw me out of that cycle. But coming back to Cumbria, again, putting my hands up there, again, feeling completely vulnerable, but feeling as if there was two options, one, to try and pick yourself back up, to try and get back up, or to shuffle off this mortal coil and go the other way and actually, no longer face the music. And having that support that came from friends and family from that moment, that vulnerability, fear in sharing the actual reality, the exact opposite thing happened. People reached out with support. There was messages, reconciling with people I hadn't spoken to for so long, because I was quite uncontactable at the time as well, really. And I tried to throw myself into fitness as a way to try and fill this void. So alcohol, again, was so much of my day-to-day existence that there was quite a big hole to fill, I guess, now, coming out of that environment. And I just tried initially to get myself out walking, looking back at what I was eating again. I loved my cooking at the time, but again, I had some lost years where I didn't really embrace perhaps some great ingredients, just picking a few chips out of the pub kitchen, sort of keeping yourself going on those long-ass shifts. But again, looking how I was fueling myself again, what I was putting into my body, I was putting shit in. I wasn't expecting myself to feel very good afterwards. So again, it was trying to have that path going forward, heading out on little walks, joined the gym again, and friends began turning up to sort of help me on these activities, I guess, to go for a walk together, to go for a little aspect, to go to the gym together. And then one particular friend turned at my doorstep and said, "Let's go for a hike." hiking the Lake District. Again, what was on my doorstep? This area that I'd taken for granted. I knew its beauty. I'd share that when I was in York. I appreciated the fact that this was the county I was from. Was proud of that, but I had never come close to hiking in one of these fells until that moment. So this was very much that first week of change. What was powerful there, and again, I suppose the levels of consumption I was going through as well at the time. Not advisable going cold turkey at this point, but just feeling so fractured in terms of who I was on this path that it felt as it was the only way to really try and redeem myself. And again, that redemption I mentioned earlier, to redeem myself for the hurt I'd caused to others, and also try and rebuild for those that had stayed present in my life.
People are so important, and that's what's so ironic when we feel so alone is that actually it's the people. It's not always necessarily the people that are around us. Let me just say that because not everyone is great when they're to be around. Obviously, I don't know everybody's situations, but a lot of the time a lot of the people that are around us, whoever they might be, we don't realize how much people need people. And we can help ourselves get out of said hole, but it's the people that are around us that really help us get out of these places or really, turn up at our doorsteps and say, hey, let's go for a hike. Even if we don't want to go for a hike, these are the people that make us go, right, I'm coming over right now and we're going for a coffee. I don't care if you can't walk, Talia, get in the car. Like, get in with your crutches. Like, it's those kind of people that they just, even if you don't realize it at the time, they're helping you get through that day, that week, that darkness. And obviously I do want to talk about then what happened from the hike and where that led you. But one thing I do want to ask you is, you were talking about cold turkey, and I'm sure that's a very, 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 very difficult thing to do. I haven't been there myself in that respect, but for people that say have or are, what is it like to be or go through, sorry, cold turkey? Because I know it's not easy.
Well, I suppose it goes sort of hand in hand with the next bits we'll touch upon in the story, but it's that first sort of 3 months for me. These days, you sort of brush over them quite quickly, whether it's in interviews like this or talking quite regularly about this publicly these days. But that was really the moment that was one of the hardest spells of my life that I've been through, if not the hardest, really. The constant, almost internal battle with that, looking at each corner of the fact that you could just slip and get that fix again. This would all be over if you just go and have that another drink. And seeing those situations around, whether it was billboard advertisements, adverts on the telly, posters on the wall of constantly these moments of temptation that you were just constantly fighting. And again, society-wise, I think it really came to terms with me how ingrained it is at that point. You almost don't realize until that point of whether you couldn't have this substance, that really how accessible it was in all corners. So for me at the time, obviously I threw my last pack of cigarettes in the bin. I mean, I'd sort of smoked 20, 40 a day at the time. I'd gone cold turkey from the levels of consumption I was having, which um, again, it was only really I think 2 weeks in that I was back at the doctor's with the family doctor again, talking about these aspects, and he was kind of, I think, quite open mouthed and shocked really about the fact that I hadn't come for any help at this point of weaning off, I suppose. But that's because it was so fractious in terms of everything else in my life. I guess that there wasn't the consideration for that for me. I think it was just literally everything I'd built, who I was, my job, my flat, my girlfriend, who I believed I was gone overnight. So it was just very much just a path that there was so much clouding and so much haze mentally. Then also the pounding of sort of the withdrawal, the pining for my ex partner, and trying to again push on as well through what was quite a lethargic lifestyle for me at the time too. So I'm grossly overweight. I'm BMI probably morbidly obese, and haven't done the exercise for 6 7 years. Again, gasping for it, really coming off the fags. All sorts was just a major change on all aspects. So there were almost at times, I guess, wasn't a lot of time to sit and reflect on, oh, how is that particular bit making me feel? Because it was just all a big sort of ball of quite destructive mental affliction, really. So yeah, those first 3 months, it felt almost as if I was carrying almost like a lead ball in my head. At times, it would just be throbbing internally into Ukrainian, just pushing against the walls. Again, looking out for that escape moment to just shut it off and take that next fix to turn it away. The cigarettes too, I suppose, as well at the time too. That was a very similar one where that almost rear its head. You'd catch a whiff in the street and you'd sort of go, I don't want one of them. Oh, I really want one of them. It was kind of two aspects mentally always, but also trying to put myself on the right path. So I did seek the medical help. I went and saw um, some substance abuse counselor at the time. I ended up in AA for a spell where that was quite like-minded people there speaking about these aspects, but also again just talking more for the time. Wasn't keeping this internal, was speaking to those around me, whether it was my family, or whether it was my friends, whether it was the professionals, charitable helplines. These are all things that are accessible. I think that's so important to know that even when we do feel so alone in these aspects, perhaps you don't have that support network, you don't have those close family relationships. There is always somebody out there to speak to. There's some fantastic charitable lines out there now that people, volunteering their time to be out there to be reachable to. And again, it was an aspect that I hadn't really utilized before that moment. I think I just again keep calm, carry on type mantra, just sort of swallow it and bear it, which again was just so ingrained, perhaps even that maybe rural northern upbringing. It was just one of those that didn't feel as if there was any other path.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and that's the thing is sometimes you don't feel like there's any path at all. And then obviously you said that you did seek help and you went to AA and there was a few other things, but then a big part of this is the outdoors and probably from whether it was that hike or the ones that continued onwards. And I want to then obviously talk a little bit about more about that then. So how did that start to play a part in things?
So this was the major sort of catalyst, I think, for me. I think finding sort of the outdoors at this time, and I think importantly, I suppose it was the medium really of activity. I think physical activity for me, and that subsequent almost endorphin rush and hit that I was getting from the activity. And an aspect like walking and hiking, I didn't know it in those early days, but it was also quite an elongated activity that was almost filling that void a lot larger than perhaps at the time what a run could do for me or what a spell in the gym could be, because I was going out there for quite long periods of time. And I appreciate again, not everyone has that on their doorstep. I was lucky to have this on the spot again, that privilege again of being in that environment. But I really hadn't embraced this before. So again, whilst we'd been to the lakes, we knew it was on the doorstep. We'd gone on family trips when we were younger. Maybe coffee and cake in Keswick, probably about as close as I came to hiking the fells at the time. This was quite a baptism of fire. I mean, my friend turned up on the doorstep, and I didn't have any clobber at the time. I didn't have any kit to put on, so I literally just grabbed what I did. And again, I was in such a bad again. Really, I was the bottom of the heap throughout that all this time in York. So I wasn't, I didn't have any nice clothes or anything out there. I was kind of just existing on most paths. Maybe it was new work shirt. I needed a new pair of shoes for behind the bar, but that was just to keep the finances coming in to get another fix on the booze side of things. So really, when it came to putting on some kit for this walk, I had some old scabby Lonsdale trainers. I think I'd been wearing for about 3 years. A pair of swimming shorts that I think I hadn't used for probably about 10 years, and sort of a jumper I'd often wear down the pub on a Friday. When I'm sort of thinking it was one of my nice jumpers. And I put that on to sort of the time. My friend turns up on the doorstep, takes one look at me and says, "You can't come out hiking like that, mate. I mean, look at the state of you." And there's me again, sort of, just this is 2 weeks from that whole moment of change. So again, I'm still completely all over the place, really, not knowing any difference. Get in the car from anywhere, and he drives into the Lake District. We get to a place called Penrith, or halfway on the way, pulls off, takes me into this outdoor store, and grabs this pair of boots. What size are you? Size 12. Grabs this pair of boots off the shelf on the counter and buys me these boots. Like a huge show of like faith and support at the time from this friend. And again, as you mentioned, those people sometimes that they can just drag you out of these situations, even when you don't really feel like you want to, but you ultimately thank them afterwards. And half an hour later, we're in the Lake District. He pulls up at the car park of this mountainside. There was a mountain called Blencathra at the time. So for those that know, in the Lake Districts, one of the higher fells in the lakes. And for a guy who's not really done anything other than walk from pub to pub for 7 years, again, gets out of puff going up the staircase. It was kind of looking up at this mountainside, thinking, "What have I got myself in for here?" So that moment of faith and support with those boots, I'm now completely questioning the fact that I've agreed to come on this walk in those early moments, whilst also again still being so hounded sort of internally by what was already going through in my other life. And really, I was almost frog marched up this hillside. So again, I was just staring at my feet. I was absolutely blowing out my arse, gasping for air, going up the hillside. Just not, certainly not putting a Strava on and seeing how fast I was getting up there, or stopping to take the views in. It was just kind of right. Let's get this blooming over with. What have I got myself in for? Staring at the ground. So again, it was just sort of just pushing on through, just having the little moments, having the breaks, and that friend, being very sort of patient, very supportive, very encouraging, up the top of this mountaintop. And eventually we got to the top. We didn't get any views at the top of the hill. Again, as is typical, often in sort of in the UK. I mean, today again, especially like that as well. And without having a chance to really take a breath, he just turns to me and says, "Right, we're going to do Hell of Ellen next week. Now, Helvellyn was the third highest mountain in the Lake District, 950 metres. For the mountains in Scotland, it'd be classified as a Munro. And again, something that again, after just literally getting to terms with the top of this mountain, I wasn't like looking forward to this moment a week later. But again, we pulled at the base of Helvellyn, looking up at this mountainside again, and it was like this sort of stone staircase to the summit top, just constantly just up and up and up. One of the routes in sort of this area that feels if you get elevation so quickly, it's just that steep a path going up to this mountaintop. And again, so this is week 3. So again, from that major turnaround, a completely different lifestyle again. By no means have I suddenly got fit in this 3-week path. I'm still going through those moments. A real baptism of fire. Sort of again, staying at my feet, pushing on through that sort of pain barrier internally, having to have that blind faith of what was to come, and feeling like this was a bit of, a physical interpretation about what I've been going through personally as well. That sort of uphill struggle, not having to have that faith of what's to come further, and not knowing really what was around that corner or what was on that mountain summit. And this day was a June day, glorious sunshine, blue skies, and reaching the top of this mountain. I remember being at the top there and I was having that slight moment of reflection. That huge sense of achievement for not only just getting to the top of that mountain itself, the fact that, how different life already was in these 3 weeks, looking out to this beautiful sort of tarn, these Pennines in the distance. We had the Striding Edge, one of the fantastic ridge walks there, cutting through the skyline. And it was just like really a new passion was being sparked, a new addiction was being ignited for this love in the outdoors. The fresh air being out there, again, that activity being out there, the endorphin hit subsequently from being out, being active. And it caused this new path moving on forward. So a week later, we went and did Scafell Pikes, so the highest mountain in England. I think we've been about 3 weeks after that. We were up to Scotland doing Ben Nevis, down to sort of Snowdon, doing Mount Snowdon there. So we've done the 3 peaks in that first sort of 2-3 weeks. And around this time, another friend had asked me if I fancied going out for a bit of a run around the block. And whilst things were going quite positively for me, again, I was maintaining my sobriety. I found myself back in work. I was working in a little cafe at the time in the Lake District, again, trying to be somewhere that wasn't around alcohol at the time, whilst also not wanting that taboo of alcohol to play a part in my life either. So I wanted to make sure that I was still able to go to social settings, because I knew life would put those paths in front of me. There was a friend stag do very early on. I remember a lot of friends saying, "No, you shouldn't go on this trip because it's going to be too tempting for you." And I was going, "Well, I'm giving them alcohol. I'm not giving them my life. It's one of my best mates here. I'm going to go on this trip." But it was also putting myself in that environment. Sometimes, perhaps, I'm putting myself in those paths of temptation. But I did love that social aspect. So I didn't want to lose that from leaving alcohol behind. But again, this one chap came with a little run, and again, I was thinking at this point, this is a bit of a step too far. If I'm honest, I'm enjoying this sort of hiking. I'm enjoying this maybe sobriety path I'm on. I'm feeling quite good about myself. We're just about past that 3 month stage I mentioned earlier now, where it literally felt like that lead balloon in my head was just popped overnight with a pin, and I felt almost like quite, weightless, almost in a way. It was like a bit of an epiphany moment. A lot of things I'd never really understood in life seemed to be quite clear, and I found I understood emotions again, which I've been so sedated for such a period that I'd almost become numb to. So that was a major moment. Anyway, he convinced me to put these trainers on. I was going, I think this is a step too far, but I couldn't run a bath literally at the time, even though I was doing the fells. But I got these trainers, went for a little run around the block. And then again, that was another sort of that 2K became 3K, became 5, became 10, and 15, 20. And then by Christmas, this same friend was there going, "Do you fancy signing up for a marathon next year?" And this now, we're coming 6 months on from that major change. In May 2017, now 11 months on from that moment of, realization, that epiphany moment in my life, I'm an alcoholic, something's got to change. I'm now crossing the line of this marathon. I'm nearly a year sober. I've lost 7 stone in weight, hadn't picked the fags back up again. And I was on a very different path in my life, and just really showed how much was possible for that moment of change with that support network, with that faith, with the right resources there. And ultimately, with just actually voicing what I was going through, not being afraid to share that. And it was just a real redemption moment for myself personally. It felt like a huge right turn in my life, and one that really I was trying to right my wrongs and trying to show that I could change. I could be this different individual. I wasn't who I'd allowed myself to become. That I had this path in me, and it was, yeah. I mean, even now thinking back, it's it's crazy, really, the cloudiness of that first year, and how each moment was really, really, yeah, struggle each day.
But it's like what you said is that you had to hit rock bottom to start to overcome, to start the process. And I think it's really hard, and it's sad when I hit rock bottom as well in my own right. And I think it's really hard that as people we have to sometimes hit rock bottom to then go, huh, wait a sec, I don't like it here. But it's incredible how somewhere along that journey to rock bottom, we don't necessarily see it. It's once something really, really pinnacle happens and it's like, okay, I don't like it here anymore. But that is usually when you get two decisions. You get a decision to go, right, I don't like it here anymore. I'm going to change. Or, you go, I don't like it here anymore, but somehow for whatever reason you can't. And I understand that sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy at all. Um, but then you find different things, and like you found the outdoors, and I'm somebody that absolutely loves the outdoors as well. I mean, I'm so jealous you've done the three peaks. I've only done two. But I was like, damn, I'm so jealous of that. I haven't done Scotland yet. But the outdoors, for anybody that's listening that loves the outdoors, and anybody that might even be like thinking about dipping their toes into it, or even if you don't want to, there's something about the outdoors. Maybe it is because we're humans, and nature, and we are all still one with the world. At the end of the day, we're all still here, whether it's a tree or a human being. We are. There is something about the outdoors that is so pure and so healing. And I know so many different, whether it's a meditation or whether it's any sort of healing aspect or group or person, anything says how important being outside is. Even if you just put your 2 feet on the grass in the morning, like even that in its own right is some sort of healing. And yeah, there is something about the outdoors, wherever it is, however you're doing it, whether it's the ocean, the mountains, the forests, it captivates you in a completely different way. Can't explain it. I have it a lot when I'm in the mountains, and it captivates you, but it is so healing. And I think maybe also what it does is it puts you so in the present moment that anything else that's going on in your mind, you actually can't think about, or you can, but you become so present to what you're doing that everything, all your other stresses or worries do seem to somehow fade. I don't know how, they just do.
There's a beauty, isn't there, I think, of knowing your own insignificance of being
Mm,
out in those vast environments. I mean,
mm,
I'm not someone that's been, much worldwide. No, I've not been in any sort of, expansive deserts, or, I know you've had my friend Alex Staniforth on the podcast before. He's been up in some of the highest mountains in the world in an environment like that, but certainly even on a smaller scale, elements here on our doorstep. Whilst I was quite lucky to be close to those mountain ranges here in the Lake District, even finding green space close to yourself, whether it's some wonderful parkland or whether it's a woodland nearby, a coastal stretch, it really is, I think, where we're designed to be. And it does feel as if it's quite a grounding process of going back into those environments, even if it's just for, a short walk with the dog and you just come out the car park sort of thing. There's still aspects of modernity that are very close, but there's the insignificance perhaps of the menial stresses of day-to-day life that get put into perspective when you're in those environments. And I think certainly if you're embracing some weathers, a bit of, embracing weather at times, that perhaps, you then start to see, really the reality of what you need in life. I think, you want that sort of warmth, you want that shelter, you want good food, perhaps, to sustain yourself. The survival tools really, it breaks down all those other little bits that are insignificant in life that you think are almost luxuries or amenities, rather, sorry, that
mm,
get put in perspective. And I think really in an environment like that, that's half the beauty. I think it's just escaping the noise of day to day life, because there's so much distractions, especially even more so with technology and stuff now, which although, I'm very much an embracer of, and perhaps I'll be a hypocrite to say I'm not on those paths, but sometimes putting that away and just actually being quite present in that spot, trying to do as little as possible, just embracing that aspect, whether it is the wildlife, whether it is the weather, whether it's the view, the vista, or the sense of achievement for yourself, going for a run around the park for a little spot there, going for a walk out to the coastline, just that fresh air. It doesn't have to be anything big, great, or small. It's all for you, those little steps. I think really do put things um, into their path again and just feel very human being out there for me. So, yeah, heading into those mountain ranges for sure. I think that is something that you can certainly relate to. I think for me, myself too, it just feels something that's so expansive that it almost allows that mind to clear as well in that space.
mm.
Whilst even though it might be quite busy when you start off with, and you're worried about maybe how the day's gone or your family's gone, stuff at work, maybe even the travel on the way there, if something's happened on the roadside. But once you're in that environment, things do become quite still and quite peaceful and reset back into place. So it's quite a sort of almost a defrag for the brain. I find being out there, so it's a place that's been very restorative for me, very healing, and just feels very natural as well. Which again, I know is quite an obvious thing to say because it is a natural environment, but it just feels with where we're meant to be, and we lose sight of that sometimes.
It is, it's the stillness and the peacefulness. Those are the 2 words that you hit the nail on the head there. It's the stillness of it and the vastness of when you're standing in, for me, it's the mountains. When I'm standing in a mountain range and I look around and I'm like teeny tiny and I like look all the way up and I'm like, wow, that's 2 hours to get up there, but that looks really close, but it's 2 hours. And you do realize, yeah, and whether it's even when you look up at outer space, I love space and I look up at the sky, you do really you do it's the stillness and the peacefulness of 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 just everyday life and everything, and taking away the noise. A lot of the times when I do go out into the mountains, as long as I'm with other people, because otherwise this isn't safe, disclaimer, I do turn my phone off or I put it on airplane mode, because I quite like the idea of, if I take it out to take a picture or video, nothing else has come through that's going to distract me in that second and make me read a text or or a social media, a notification, anything. And all I've got is me, maybe the camera that I'm taking the photograph with, and then anything else that I'm channeling or I'm going through. Because sometimes as well, you start a hike and all your thoughts are there, but within an hour, they're gone.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? I think it's certainly something that I'm definitely guilty of as well. I think of finding yourself looped back into those practices. I mean, if anything, it's the condition, isn't it? I think of technology to a way. I mean, I'm certainly someone now that perhaps quite struggles to just sit there. I mean, I couldn't just sit and do nothing and stare out into the abyss for 2 hours. I think that would be I'd be too much going on in my mind for that sort of path. But doing something else that's almost quite absent-minded, or an activity in those paths. So again, even if it was walking or running, or sometimes I've got my headphones on, a bit out there too. All the aspects of cooking that I've come into now, into the outdoors, is a practice that, whilst you're present in that environment, is also enough to almost stimulate something slightly active in there whilst doing it. So I enjoy that practice in a way. But I think it's important too that it's not a case of stepping out onto the grass and all of a sudden that's it, problems are all solved. We can talk about the outdoors as if it's this absolute cure all at times, and of course these have to be in place with other practices in life as well, whether it's still seeking that medical support, seeking that support network in paths. But for me, ultimately, it was just that activity again, body and mind in that natural space, getting active again, losing the weight, leaving behind some of those negative vices and replacing those with positive vices more so. Because I think sometimes we do have to latch onto these elements to help us, whether it's survival mechanisms or coping mechanisms, whilst not running away from those problems. They're also things that help you cope with the day to day. So they're very much managing processes for me now of being out there. If I've not been active, I very much notice that. I notice the effect mentally. I notice the effect sort of day to day. But being in the outdoors, especially, is where I really want to practice, I suppose, um, that activity in there. That's where I find most home. That's where I find most restorative and most healing.
And then you obviously mentioned the cooking, which I wanted to speak about as well. So, what do you do with the cooking in the outdoors?
Yeah, so it's obviously a very natural jump, isn't it, to go from doing this and drinking your life away to running up some mountains to then all of a sudden start cooking outdoors. I mean, everyone does it, surely.
Everyone, everyone. I'm going to do it
Um,
tomorrow.
no. It's for me at the time. Again, I mentioned briefly that I began cooking a lot more from scratch when I sort of went through this sort of turning point in my life, this life change. I always loved my cooking as a child. I cooked a lot with my grandmother. Um, Being the eldest of sort of 7 cousins, I guess, spending a lot of time with her, almost till it's being put to work to help out in sort of the kitchen for the family dinners there. But love the sort of sensation that food brought, the aspects of community, the sort of sharing tales or sharing experiences with somebody else around food, whether that was friends going out to dinner, or whether that was just the family gathering around the table slightly, which we do less and less of now. But it began a bit of a sort of almost a self scholarship, if you will, of watching a lot of cooking shows. I read a lot of cookbooks, and whilst I never sort of trained culinary, I wouldn't call myself a chef, very much a cook. I've just always liked that aspect of partnering different ingredients, working out different cultures um, through cuisine and various aspects, and also the community aspect to it. So for me, whilst there was a nutritional aspect, when I first got out of that path, I was looking to how I was fueling myself again, not expecting a car to go 100 miles on a bad fuel source. So what I was eating was quite important too. I could be doing all this exercise but eating absolute crap, and it probably wouldn't have had the same sort of impact. So that was important in itself. But I began basically for these hikes taking leftovers, if you would, from the night before, or stuff I'd made purposely to take for a packed lunch into the hills with me. So it was something to when I sat on the top of the hillside, got the lunchbox out, and I didn't really ever like, quick and easy convenience foods. I was never really someone that was big into sort of the fast food joints. The meal deal from the shop or the pot noodle just doesn't really sing to me. Really, I mean, like, I don't see any joy in it. I mean, I see it sometimes it's just fuel rather than substance. But for me, I don't know. I just wouldn't want to consume that. So it's kind
Sorry, can I just interject to
of,
say, are you even British if you don't like pot noodles?
I know, sorry, I should maybe, yeah, that's it. I'm not to smirch a particular brand, but I don't think I've ever had one in my life, to be honest. But it's so maybe I'm knocking it before I've tried it. But no, I've just never been that sort of fix. So for me, it was just kind of making stuff to make on the hillside to eat out there, something I'd made. Even if it was just a sandwich out there, just something I'd made at home to take out because I enjoyed that aspect of some good food in that path. Why does that has to be the first thing we sacrifice when we go and do these activities? It's always packing a chocolate bar, getting a meal deal from the shops, or taking some, fluorescent gel tubes and to go and do these big long runs. It was just something that I liked that fact that I could enjoy something I wanted to eat as well. So I started taking this in the hillside with me out there. I suppose at this time I dubbed myself the Fell Foodie, and I had a little Instagram account that I'd started online. So I'd never used Instagram before. I'd never really used social media other than that initial cry for help moment on my personal page. But I suppose looking back, I was still really wearing a bit of a mask at the time. I didn't want to showcase this was me. I didn't put a name on it. I didn't share any pictures of myself. It was just, I suppose, Instagram back in the day when it was all sort of image led and just bits out there, hashtag no filter, was all sort of very much about just the views I was experiencing and perhaps the food I was cooking at the time at home. So I was one of those people that was taking pictures of my creations at home. Sorry. So I kind of basically set this account up to not annoy any Facebook friends with pictures of my dinner. That's kind of why I started it. But I thought, I love the fells, which are what we call the hills in this part of the world, and I love food. So Fell Foodie seems to have a nice little spin, nice little pseudonym to go behind. So I started showcasing this online. And again, so I was taking the packed lunches in the hillside, taking sort of snaps of these on the hilltop. And one guy passed me one day on the hillside, took a little notice of what I was eating, and was like, "Oh, I wish I had that. I've just got my soggy cling film sandwiches in my bag today, all squashed at the bottom." He said, "Oh, you should get a stove and cook it out here from scratch next time." And without really answering him, I just sort of, the cogs start going in your head a bit, and I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to give that a go. So I bought a stove for the first time. I didn't have any equipment again, like I mentioned at the start with the walking. I didn't have any pots and pans to take out, but I bought this camping stove and started seeing if the love really, quite a mindful practice of cooking at home that I really enjoyed. Now with this aspect of being in the outdoors and loving that endorphin hit of being out there, that sense of achievement of scaling the hillsides, if I'd merged the two, would that passion still be the same or would it be heightened, for example? So initially, I was taking up pots and pans from the kitchen. I was probably taking ceramic plates out with me. I think I was taking proper big wooden spoons to go out there and try and cook on this little camping stove in the hillsides and in this environment. And again, use it as a practice to be quite still in that process rather than sitting there again, still doom scrolling, probably sat by a tree somewhere rather than taking in the view. So it was that aspect of doing something that was a little bit absent-minded, but was also having to be quite present in that environment. And it really went from there. So I just started to try and create things in the outdoors. I tried to see if I could take the same processes, but also now seeing if I could recreate the aspects I loved at home, now on quite minimal equipment in remote locations. And this also, I guess, sparked a bit of interest for some people online, gained quite a modest following on my account at the time. And then around my second year sober in 2018, I now decided to share my backstory of why I'd gone into all this and really almost unmask myself in a way, whilst it was, again, a modest audience. It was quite a personal moment again, a big milestone moment of actually now speaking out about this, not only to friends and family, but now putting this out there into the world in a way. So this is why I've gone to the hills. This is what I was struggling with, the subsequent alcoholism, why I got to the paths, and how restorative I found the hillsides for me. And then this random quirky love of outdoor cooking. And again, just like that first time, the messages poured in, people who'd found similar reasons for being outdoors, they found that similar refuge of being out there, or the activity of just, physical activity, being out there too, the loves of food, or perhaps loved ones who'd gone through similar afflictions, and some who hadn't been so lucky as well, who hadn't found that path, hadn't got that rock bottom, or hadn't escaped from some of these addictions. And it was really humbling, really, and really sort of just sung to me that this path I was on was sort of the right path, and that this was now, finding your tribe in a way, people that could understand and sort of push that sort of mantra. So it sparked a bit, I suppose, a passion for sharing this and also trying to utilize my own personal tale, I suppose, to try and help others in a way, I guess, trying to speak out about that, maybe a bit of a voice for the voiceless and try to utilize the fact I could articulate what I'd been through to hopefully help somebody else that was still early on in their battle of feeling quite alone and not coming to terms with this. So it was adding my voice to the conversation that these days we see a lot more, I think, um, globally about the fact that this was okay to talk about and there is help available. So it wasn't a path that was ever really envisioned. Again, these days now, sort of 4 years, 6 years on from that moment, sorry, a very different life altogether. I'm quite known for going cooking in the mountaintops. I'm known for taking my little camping stove up there and trying to create all sorts of weird culinary delights on a little camping stove, from nice little risottos to stews or baking focaccia breads out there or all sorts on the tops, just showcasing what's possible, but also enjoying the kind of slapstick sort of quirkiness to it, and the fact that it's almost completely pointless at times cooking these aspects on top of the mountains, but doing it, for the hell of it. I like that practice. I like that challenge. It gives me something else to do while I'm up there. And also, rather than just going to the top of the mountain and touching the summit top and coming down again or taking that selfie, it makes me be quite still in that environment. So I stop, I get my stuff out there on the ground. I'm sat on a little sit mat. I'm preparing this little meal. I'm being present in that environment. Obviously, if the weather's okay. If it's particularly bad, I'm probably at home watching some box set. But being out there at the time, and being in that environment and just enjoying that aspect and that kind of primal homage to sort of being cooking outdoors again. Whilst I'm always a big leave no trace advocate, I'm not lighting fires in the outdoors. I'm bringing everything back down with me, but it's still a bit of a nod to living out there, living outdoors again, under the stars, sometimes camping out, crafting these meals, and in company as well, sharing conversation across the proverbial campfire or the camp stove is a really sort of human experience. So it's just something that's just sung to me, emerging those two passions as the fell foodie as I do myself.
What's your favorite thing that you've made on the mountains or outdoors even? I have to know. I have to.
This question comes up quite a lot when I sort of do some talking. It's always very difficult to answer. I always find I'm quite a politician when it comes to this sort of question. I think it's kind of very difficult. I really just love cooking. I
Yeah.
love the aspect of cooking for other people. I love someone telling me, what their favourite dish is, and the fact that if I can then do that in quite a unique environment and play a unique spin that's going to be quite memorable for them to enjoy, then that's the joy in me. The joy is almost the giving side, I think, of giving food and giving that um, sort of culinary survival in a way out there. That's the aspects I like, that human path. But for me personally, if it was just me out there, I think I'd probably lend myself more to sort of quite Italian cuisine or Greek cuisine. I really love out there as well. So I love sort of quite slow cooked stifados and bits out there too, or meze salads and sharing food as well. Because I think that's often where again that human connection again of sharing with other people, having it all laid out in front on a mat or a table, and everyone diving in, sort of the tapas sort of Spanish Mediterranean vibe. So um, yeah, I mean, all sorts. Again, sometimes the challenge too is to see what I can create out there. So from anything to baking a cake out there, which probably was one thing I was probably best known for. Having a chance to go on the television and baking a cake on there for someone quite well known, or going out there to try and maybe craft sort of quite homely one pot dishes out there too. But again, difficult. Sorry, I've danced around that question as always, but it's I just enjoy the process. I enjoy the process of being out there.
But that's what it is, isn't it? It's enjoying what you love to do, and it's being part of what you're doing, and it's just being able to go out there and do it. Whatever it is that you're making, it's and I understand the giving thing. It's doing it either if it is just for yourself out there or if it's for everyone else around. So it's amazing, and I mean, I guess this is it as well, and I know you did slightly mention it. It's the whole case of, had you have said this to yourself however many years ago, this is where your life would have taken you, would you have said, yeah, sure, that sounds good? Or would you have been like, nah, that's not going to happen? Who knows? But a lot of the times when we can plan life, or we think we can plan life, and other things sometimes just fall into place, things that we never really thought we were going to do, things that we never thought maybe even were possible. And even in our darkest of moments, if someone was to say, oh yeah, by the way, in X many years time you're going to be maybe feeling like this and doing this and being there, you're probably going to be like, nah, like nah. But things just miraculously can fall into place. if you want them to, they can, and they can take you into adventures, whether it's cooking in the mountains or whatever it might be, that you just never ever thought was going to happen to you. And it's really amazing how, obviously, it's really hard that a lot of us have to go through things in life. Um, we have to go through certain things in life to lead us into these paths. Who knows? Maybe sometimes we might not have had to, but sometimes maybe we are, because we're forced to. We're given that moment where we're pushed to do it. At the time, we don't realize we're being pushed, but we're being pushed to do these things. And yeah, like I said, it's hard that some of us, or a lot of us, have to go through these things. But, and again, they can go very many different ways, but a lot of the times we come out as very different people, and people that, are probably greater than we ever thought we could be.
I think that's ultimately, yeah, for me, it was just kind of becoming that person you believed you could be
Yeah.
in a way, but also trusting that path along the way. I wasn't someone that was, waiting to be lifted up from those darker moments. It was something that, again, that path was unexpected. Um, and whilst also, again, quite looking back as well, it's one of those that you do sometimes question, because it took me really hurting somebody else I loved for me to get to that awakening point, which is a bizarre one. It's sometimes not always a case of, oh, wonderful plaudits and bits there, because you've almost had to, do something negative to get to that point. But um, trying to repair that was quite a big catalyst for me early on. I mean, it was very much about trying to win that partner back, I suppose, early doors, which wasn't the case ultimately. But it became more of a journey for myself, but also trusting that path I was on from that moment. Whilst I don't think sometimes you can be there going, "This is it. It's all going to change well for me if I keep sitting here waiting." You have to go and make that moment yourself. But it was then also on that path. It was allowing things to fall in place quite naturally. It
Mm.
wasn't trying to force bits. It was about keeping my side of the street clean, letting others worry about theirs and certain paths. And again, whether there was people doubting, the sobriety side of things, people saying you couldn't, you won't be able to do that, or that you're pushing this too far. But having that faith in yourself, I guess, and bits too. So it was very much a path that a lot of it, I suppose there was even maybe a spiritual aspect at times too. I did quite sort of just let myself be quite open to things out there too, and be in the outdoors and let that path go, and just make little sort of progressive steps as it went on. Those sort of added up over time. So, um, turning up each day, whilst there was a huge thing even internally of trying to go for the first time I went sort of, for a run, for example, I was still really battling the outside perception of me. The guy was quite overweight going for a run, what people would be thinking, what they were doing there. But realizing a lot of this is all internal for us. It's people aren't that bothered. They've got their own things going on, their own day to day. They're kind of on their own path, probably thinking the same thing themselves. But for me, it was about the fact that if I was going to do that, no matter how sort of far I was going, no matter how fast or slow I was going at the time, it was a lot more than the man that was going to be sat at home on the sofa. So it was always personal progression. It was always competing against myself, really, rather than other people. Just trying to progress into a better person and trusting that path in a way, and letting it add up and accumulate as time went on. But it's one I know we spoke on a sort of previously about sort of something that was one that again isn't a linear path either. For me, this is something that was a great redemption arc for me. That particular path, I was on a path I was very much really happy with. I was happy with how I was, the progression I was making at the time. Things have since gone a different sort of tangent, and obviously this has all evolved into a wonderful opportunity to sort of be this person now known for sort of this cooking aspect's led on to some wonderful opportunities further. But internally, so not internally, but on another aspect, it's also maybe slipped slightly on other aspects of my life, and perhaps my fitness aspects and things too. And even coming out of sort of a period like lockdown, which was a period that a lot of these were stripped back away from us again. All of a sudden, I was back in those own four walls, again, without those positive means of coping. The gyms had shut, mountain rescue was saying not to go into the mountains. And these are all paths that kind of pushed me back into being a bit insular. And it really, a moment that I really would have been easy to drink on again, and was very tempting to drink again, just to allow life to fast forward a bit. So this for me is when I mentioned at the very start about these being tools for managing, mental health. For me, this is a battle that continues for me really. That whilst I have much better days, it's certainly not big mountains and valleys anymore. It's more sort of little peaks and troughs. It's a much smoother path, but I still have to play these parts along the way and utilize these tools. Certainly, physical activity be out there that I'm still rebuilding the routine for. Still looking at the nutrition aspect in there. Still speaking openly about the things I'm going through and seeking support to maintain that path. Really for a stronger mental health.
And that's exactly it. And I know we've discussed this not today, but on a separate call, is mental health. doesn't, whatever it is that you're going through, something, everyone's going through it very differently, but it's not just gonna get better overnight. And it can be a case of it does get better, and you work a lot on it, but it's knowing that you can also still have really bad days or really bad weeks or really bad moments. And if those moments come, even if you're a month or a year or even a years into your, however it is that you see it, your self-help or your healing or however you want to phrase it, because people phrase it very differently, is that still not every day is going to be rainbows and sunshines and gold. Like, it's just not, because it's just not what life is. It's not how humans are. And I think that you have to be okay knowing that if things come crashing down in an hour or a day or for a week, for instance, that's okay. And you hopefully either are still building or have built or are in the process of it, building those coping mechanisms or those tools or those habits to help you get through that hour, that day, that week, however it's long it's going to take. And knowing that you've been able to get through things once before or however many times before, you are going to be able to keep getting through them. And I think it's so important to know with mental health or whatever it is you're going through, whether it's short term or long term, that it's okay when things get hard again. And it's like I said, it's okay when things get hard again. And you have to almost accept the darkness and the light. It's like, I think I only recently saw something and it was about yin and yang. Life comes with light and darkness, and you have to be okay in the darkness and not continuously try to push away the darkness. And if the darkness comes, even if you are in your healing journey and you're a lot lighter and however different you are than you used to be, the darkness is still going to come because that's human life. It just is. And you have to know that, okay, the darkness is here. I'm going to be okay. Like, it's not going to crash and the world's not going to end because the darkness has arrived today. It's going to be okay. And however you need to get through it, or whether that is maybe crying or feeling really bad about yourself for however long, that's okay, because it is going to pass eventually, like it always does.
I think that's a brilliant point. Yeah, knowing that is a normal route and normal thoughts to go through in that path as well, as you say. And for me, even with the alcohol side, it's something that people often ask if you miss that aspect of things in life. And whilst there is sort of the temptation at points where in these days I'm over 8 years sober from that day now, it's very much a different life path to what I was on. But there are still moments of that temptation, still very much a one day at a time type approach. Despite having those sort of years behind me, it's sometimes still maybe one or two drinks away from those paths. So maintaining that lack of not like that lack of complacency creeping in on those paths. But there is certainly an aspect I think sometimes of missing that escapism tool of it, though. I think it's not so much the taste of drinks out there. I mean, there's wonderful alcohol-free options and things out there these days that can replace that vibe. But sometimes missing that escapism aspect for me is a thing. But as you said about the sort of the sunshine and rainbows element to life, for me, shutting off and fast forwarding through life at one point was my way of running away from it a little bit, my way of hiding what was really going on and not really facing that. But not having that anymore means that I have to be present through those darker days. I have to be present through that darkness. I have to be present through those rainier days. But it also means I'm far more present through those better days as well. So there's the flip side to that, where previously those would also be numb and be sedated, but now they are much higher moments of euphoria. So again, as I mentioned, it wasn't those big, huge mountains and troughs, crevices before. It's more little peaks and valleys. Life is much more stable across the board, but we'll always have those ups and downs because that's what life's about. But it's for me, it's just knowing how to manage those better, and again, being far more present to those around me, loved ones around me too, and also in my own life for myself. So it's been a real arc um, for myself, yeah. And I think I can safely say I did get back up from that one.
It is exactly that, isn't it? It's exactly that. And then I like that you've thrown that in a few times, by the way. The "I got back up" thing. You have thrown that in. Um, and I do wanna, before we do finish up, I wanna ask you then, what advice would you give to somebody that they're at the point where whether however their rock bottom was, whatever it is that made them go, right, I wanna, you know, I wanna get through this, I wanna change, I wanna stop whatever it is, drinking, the drugs, whatever it might be. And they're at that very, very, very beginning stage, whether they go cold turkey or however they take it, however they do it. What would you say to them at that very beginning stage where they just think that it's just not going to work and they do not see this happening or the light?
Yeah, that's a really powerful question. Really, I think sort of even reflecting on that personally, it's kind of one that sometimes people again ask me what I'd have said to my younger self. If there's anything I could have changed growing up that sort of path, and if I could have gone on a different tangent at times. But I think ultimately for me, for myself at the time, I think I just simply have said the word "stay" to myself at the time. There were so many times I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to be present. I was always looking for the way out. I was looking for life just to fly by, and that was it, and just be blackout. But really staying has meant that all of this is possible now, where I've got to, and I think these days I have a lot more appreciation for life again now, for myself, present wise that way. And I'm not in that darkness path that I was in. Whilst again, as I mentioned, there's some little peaks and troughs that they're not as deep as they were in the past. So that was a big thing for me because there was times where I might never have seen these days,
Mm.
and that was a huge thing. So I think just knowing again that trust in the process, staying, pushing those bits, and just trying to make little positive steps each day. For those that are maybe going through the rock bottom phase, picking themselves up, it looks such a daunting path ahead, and I completely understand that. Again, like that me at the start on that first mountain, staring up at the top, thinking, "How the hell am I going to get up there? I've never done anything like this before." But having that faith, and again, that was that support network around that I was privileged to have. That's quite an important bit. But even in yourself, it was trusting that process. It was not being worried to fail, not being worried to make that first step, and those little steps adding up further as they go. Trusting that process, little positive progressions as they go, and not trying to sort of um, move on too quickly on that path. So I think really it was just being a bit kind to yourself on those bits, doing the best you can, speaking about openly about this. It's absolutely fine to struggle and fail a little bit, and have little stumbles, but speaking about those, utilizing those as further tools to your arsenal to move further forward in that thing. So it is possible. You can change on these paths, and again, if you're willing to make those moves, just making those little positive steps as you go and trusting the process.
Absolutely. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. And that's all you need to know. It's literally one day at a time. And yeah, I think as long as you know that, then you can visualize however you want to be, wherever you want to be, but it is literally one day at a time.
And I think a mantra like that as well helps you not sweat the small stuff a bit as well, doesn't it? I think
Mm.
just you don't look too. Well, I used to look so far ahead in life in terms of where you want to be, 10-year plan, this year plan, and whilst they play a part in terms of elements where you have to look that way, whether it's career aspect bits or certain points, but sometimes I think just looking actually what is directly ahead at the time, leaving it behind all those bits, leaving behind the pressures. I think that society pushes too on you about trying to have these plans in place. Well, what are you doing there? What are you doing next month? What are you doing that? Just taking each day as it comes at the time is quite mindful in itself. Really, I think you only really battle on what is in front of you that day. So again, opening the curtains, seeing what weather you're facing, and going from that moment on. You can only plan so far ahead. So you've got to make adaptations. You've got to make pivots. You've got to make overcoming points as you go along. So one day at a time has always been a big mantra for me, and one that I would recommend to others.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's yeah, it's an amazing place to finish this episode up. So thank you very, very much for joining me. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
I think I've done enough waffling, to be honest, Talia. I think I've pretty much covered most things. If anyone stuck by us this whole time, I do appreciate that. But again, if anyone has any questions from me personally, I'm always more than happy to reach out to on my personal channels. You can find me at Fell Foodie across all social platforms, or my email via the website. I'm not a medical professional, but I'm more than happy to share my lived experience with somebody else that has those questions. But otherwise, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Those for listening, and yeah, thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Life is full of dark and light, but that darkness only makes that light shine even brighter. The bottom of every mountaintop we climb looks incredibly daunting. How am I ever going to make it up, we question. So remember, one day at a time is a pretty good pace. That path won't always be straightforward or up. It'll dip, it'll rise, it'll change direction almost suddenly or gradually. Or you might even change course. You might be forced to change course because of unforeseen moments that are completely out of your control. But one step at a time, that's a pretty good pace. Without our darkness, we wouldn't have our light. So stay. Please don't go anywhere. Keep fighting, keep trying. and keep dancing even when all the lights go out. So until next time, remember, you have the power inside you. We all do. You have the power to get back up.